While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. One of the great things about covering industrial cybersecurity is the number of reports, studies, and white papers being produced right now to help provide intelligence on threats, research on new tools, and data on leading trends. The tough part is sorting through all this data and at some point prioritizing it in order to get the most and best information. One source that I look forward to each year is IBM's X-Force Threat Intelligence Index. It's full of all the stuff I just mentioned, but with special attention paid to the industrial sector. Unfortunately, some of that attention results from manufacturing being the most highly attacked industry for the fourth consecutive year. Also, according to the index, it had the most ransomware incidents in 2024. But as Chris Caridi, a cyber threat analyst for X-Force and our guest for today's episode, shared with me, the news is not all bad. Chris, thanks for joining us and welcome to Security Breach. So first of all, Chris, thanks for the time and welcome to Security Breach.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So a ton of different stuff in this X4 strategic threat analysis report. A lot of great information out there, especially for manufacturing, things that we kind of confirmed a lot of things we already knew, but also some different facts that we haven't thought about before. From your perspective, was there anything that really jumped out at you or kind of caught you maybe by surprise or reinforced some of the things that you kind of thought were going on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I've got to say that the rise in infostealer malware being delivered via phishing email, that was one that I wasn't really expecting to see this year. The whole concept of it really underpins a lot of the trends that we've seen and highlighted in this year's report. Such as the abuse of valid credentials and the potential shift from trying to deliver persistent malware on endpoints through email.
Yeah. The phishing was talked about a lot in the report. It's really interesting, and it seems like it's one of those basic things that we're talking about all the time, and there's a lot of training on. Why do you think these phishing emails continue to be so successful? Why does this persist?
Well, because I think, the human aspect of security continues to be one that is exploitable, right? Like people that are doing business on a day-to-day, they're expecting to get emails from certain individuals. They're expecting to have to open attachments, right, and do all these things. And attackers know that, and they're being creative in the ways in which they're sending phishing emails, but also, ways in which they're tricking users into clicking on these things. In particular, we found a large increase this year in the attachments being of the PDF variety, which is not something that we've seen in previous years, because PDFs, it's kind of playing off the human psychology, right? Like we're getting a PDF from someone, even someone that we might be expecting to get an email from, and we might open that, right? We know we've been kind of conditioned to be careful about opening spreadsheets and Word documents, right? Yeah. But now we're saying, okay, what about PDFs? Well, we haven't received that same level of scrutiny in the past, so PDFs are usually safe, so let me open those, and so it just kind of speaks to the attackers keeping their eye on, hey, like what's not working anymore? What can we try this time, right? So, I think that kind of is the nexus of that.
Yeah, there's this evolution from the bad actors that we're seeing there. Organizations are becoming much more complex. It's going to come into play when we talk a little bit about ransomware here down the line. But the other thing with these phishing emails, what we're seeing a lot of too, and I'm sure you are as well, is the advanced use of artificial intelligence, so that they're able to use AI and plug it in to make these phishing emails seem a lot more realistic. They're getting rid of a lot of the syntax errors and the other things that made them stand out in the past. How are you seeing sort of AI elevate some of these phishing schemes as well?
Yeah, so I mean AI as it relates to phishing in particular, right? So the AI topic, I guess, is a big one. A lot of people want to talk about that. But from the phishing perspective, yes, that's one of the areas where it's like the most simple way to use AI, right? From an attacker perspective, it's the same. Honestly, it's the same way that non-criminal actors are using AI, right? Help me improve my grammar for this email or for this paper that I'm writing, right? So obviously it's not a surprise, but yes, attackers now who historically have had trouble crafting emails in English, for example, right, or whatever language that they might be looking to do, they're getting assistance from these LLM tools who can craft you a well articulated email message in the basically whatever language you choose, right? So yes, of course that's occurring, but as I guess effective as that can be, it's still, it doesn't change the response. It doesn't change the impact that those emails have, right? It might give you a slightly higher success rate, right? Because people aren't going to be thrown off by, hey, why does this email have spelling errors and grammatical errors all over the place, which was always like the big red flag when looking for phishing emails. So yes, that does happen, but it's something that I think the world is kind of adjusting to, because everyone's using that, right? Not just attackers these days.
Absolutely. One of the things that stuck out to me in looking through the report too is there's a lot of mention about a real focus on going after login credentials and the dark web. There's a lot of conversation about credential harvesting and sharing and selling all of this information. What do you think is sort of proliferating that? It seems like such a basic thing, again, for cybersecurity to be mindful of and protective of. What are we doing wrong here? Why do you think that's continuing to be such an area of success for the hackers?
Yeah, I agree. And that was, like I said in the earlier question, that was one of my like almost eye-opening takeaways, is that, and to answer what it is that we're doing wrong, I think it's really worth asking how attackers are getting access to the credentials in the first place, because then that'll help us understand if we're doing something wrong, and then how can we do it better. So what we've seen when creating this report is that a great majority of the credentials that are available for sale on the dark web do come from infostealer malware. So in that case, we have to ask, well, how did this malware get into the environment in the first place? Was it a phishing email? Was it malvertising campaign somewhere? Did someone download a Trojanized installer when they thought they were installing a legitimate piece of software? And second, we have the usual suspects as it relates to credential policies, right? Like we still see really poor password hygiene requirements in some organizations. We still see password reuse across multiple accounts. We have the like I said, the complexity requirements. It's a mixed bag, really, depending on kind of what incident you're responding to, whether or not they have good ones or bad ones. And then things like misconfiguration of multi-factor authentication, or just straight up in 2025, no multi-factor authentication at all, which is something that we've been for years kind of pressing our clients in particular. And when we put out these reports, we really recommend, it's really no longer like a nice to have. It's really something that every organization should be implementing this across the enterprise, especially when you have clients and customers that use your login portals. I mean, I think when you give up some of that security because you're allowing external parties to connect into your environment, I think you really need to make sure you have those policies not only implemented, but implemented properly, which speaks to misconfiguration issues as well.
Yeah. So, we talk about a lot of this what I always refer to as the blocking and tackling type stuff, multi-factor authentication, getting away from the admin passwords, all of that type of stuff. The lack of doing that and the continuation of making it easier to grab onto these credentials because of these bad practices. I know it's a combination of all these, but do you see, is it a cultural thing? Is it a lack of training thing? Is it the individual just not realizing the ramifications of their small actions can have on this whole big enterprise?
We'll be back after a quick break. If you spend way too much time online, first of all, same. And second, you need promo guy talk pills. I'm Rawal, and with Alex, we break down everything happening in tech, digital marketing, and the internet's latest chaos. No boring corporate talk, just real discussions with real opinions. So go on, press play. You know you want to.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess the correct answer is that it's a combination of all those things. But the last thing you said, I think people who are not, they're not a background in security, right? They understand it's important, but it's not their day-to-day operations. They're just an employee they don't understand that a small compromise somewhere can be catastrophic, everywhere, right? I think that messaging it's something that I think that they inherently they can't grasp that because they don't understand how connected everything is, especially within a single organization. So that messaging it's easy to tell somebody that, but it's really hard to show them, right? Until something happens, right? Like, oh, you're the person who clicked on this link or whatever, and now the company's having a hair on fire day, and everyone's got to go home because all the machines are encrypted. Right. It's that I think people just the layperson or someone who might not be in the technology space or especially the security space, they just it's hard for them to understand that that's possible. And training is something that I know companies have their mandated cybersecurity training, and that's great. It needs to continue, but I think that's always going to be a challenge, right? Is getting folks to understand just how important this stuff is, and that's not really a technology problem. That's a human problem, and there's a lot of human problems that we haven't solved yet, security related or not. So that's just another one.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we need to get out of that mindset of it's just another check the box type of activity and really focus on it, bring it home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So, one of the things the report pointed out, and this wasn't a surprise, but it's never great to see, was for the fourth straight year, manufacturing was the most attacked industry. Mm. And I bring this up not only to help illustrate, because that's our audience. We focus on industrial cybersecurity here, but also a lot of things that were brought about with remote monitoring and some of the vulnerabilities that are coming from people logging in remotely to access very important information. For the industrial sector, they're looking at different on-floor maintenance activities, performance activities, a lot of very important equipment that they're able to monitor potentially remotely. We're still seeing a ton of vulnerabilities, a lot of people coming in, compromising these endpoints. Yep. What are you seeing, I guess, and that's a long drawn-out way of saying, what can we do better when it comes to some of these remote access activities so that we are able to see the benefits without also leaving ourselves so wide open to the hackers?
And I think that last sentence there is important. So, and before I give you an answer, I'll say I understand that there are great benefits in having the ability to have, this remote access, especially in a manufacturing organization. You want efficiency. You want things to be fast. You want, whether it's third parties to be able to come in and help with your workflow and monitor operations, whatever. We understand that it's it's valuable. But I think we're in the case of remote access, I think what we're actually seeing is misconfigurations more so than an inherent problem with remote access, right? So better yet, we're talking about remote access issues or vulnerabilities, if you want to call it that, due to some kind of misconfiguration, right? And I think a lot of that stems from suboptimal authentication policies. Right? In the manufacturing environment, access control has to be paramount. It should be incredibly robust. It should be incredibly detailed. You should be able to, as a manufacturer, the security team inside a manufacturing organization, you should be able to account for the entire IP space that's allowed to connect to your, whatever it is inside your environment. Whether it's a piece of equipment that's critical, whether it's systems that control scheduling or anything that if it was to be tampered with in any way could be catastrophic, right? There should be no reason why external connections from certain geographic regions should even be allowed. There are ways to greatly reduce or mitigate risk of bad actors. Being able to do things like that if you really tighten down the access controls. And I think, that's not an inherent flaw in the ability to do remote access or the remote access capability. It's a flaw in how it was set up. So I think, and the misconfigurations is a category in and of itself that we track as a, initial access vector, right? And it's oftentimes during incident response engagements, it's hard to pin down what that misconfiguration might have been. So a lot of times, it's up to us to say, hey, we might not have seen an inherent flaw in the protocol that you were using, or it was patched properly, but it wasn't set up in such a way. Like, it could have been set up with tighter restrictions, and you would have had no downside, but you would have had a much larger upside from the ability to prevent, unauthorized users from logging in.
Yeah, I mean, the misconfiguration thing, and really I think that bleeds into a couple of other big issues for the industrial sector, really cybersecurity as a whole, but we're especially seeing it with manufacturing now, that cybersecurity has become such more prominent of an issue and a bigger challenge. Part of that is resources. We don't always have the subject matter expertise in-house that we would like in configuring this. And we're also doing, as the report alluded to, and as we've talked a lot about on the program here, is a lot of legacy equipment that's still in place and is still vital and performing well, but we're not hooking up the new stuff very well to the old stuff.
Exactly.
From your perspective, Chris, is there a bigger priority? I mean, is one of these happening or causing a bigger set of confusion or misconfigurations, or is just sort of a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, I think the legacy part is a big deal. Understanding and having folks who understand the nuanced, requirements of a legacy system and how to bring that up to a modern security standards. It's hard, right? It's hard to find folks who understand that in a way that's going to be effective, and still allow you to use that legacy system in a way that, let's be honest, you have it because you need it for some reason, right? You're using it because you need it for some reason. Otherwise, you'd probably, migrate to something that's more modern, more secure. So it is hard. It is a people and expert problem, not because people don't want to do the right thing in that case, but it's just, there's no operating manual, right, on how to get these things to talk together nicely sometimes. So you end up trying to, do the best you can. And unfortunately, in this time, it's not always enough. And I think what's interesting is, I feel like, going back maybe a decade, I think we saw this same kind of growing pains in the financial sector. There was a lot of legacy systems there as well. And before manufacturing was the number one most targeted industry, it was the financial services industry. And it took time to migrate to systems that were more modern, that could perform the same functions with a greater emphasis on security. And it took time for people to become experts in these things, right? Because, especially the rate in which technology moves, the experts have to, in some cases, they have to play catch up, right? In that regard. So, I think one of the things that, manufacturing is learning, it's kind of the same things that the financial services industry learned, a decade ago, and that, security it's not only important, it's really like paramount. And, when we're choosing systems or making investments in new technology, it's that it has to almost, A, can this get the job done that I need? But then B, like right behind that, and almost equally as important, is this something that we can secure in our environment in a way that's not going to cause us, to be victims of some kind of massive problem, sometime in the future. So, I remember this a decade ago, and it's kind of now, something that the manufacturing sector is facing. But, I think, look, if our data is any indication, the manufacturing sector, this year's report and last year's report, so I guess the last 1 year versus 2 years, they haven't grown. They're still number one, but it hasn't gone up. So that's, take that for what it's worth, but, potentially a good sign, right? It's not like we're growing in the volume. It's we're not decreasing yet, which is what obviously everybody wants to see, but we're not going up. So take that for what, maybe that's a good sign.
Yeah. No, I think in the last 18 to 24 months, the industrial sector has gotten a lot better. There is a lot more priority being placed on this and more investment being made as well when it comes to cybersecurity. Colonial Pipeline was really a benchmark event for industrial cybersecurity. But I think the thing that's really helping reinforce it is, well, conversations like this, but also a lot of the work that CISA is doing and sending out a lot of vulnerabilities and talking about patch management and secure by design, and just really reinforcing the need to have those conversations internally. The report talks a lot about some of the law enforcement efforts that have been made in shutting down some of the ransomware groups, some of the more prominent ones that we're familiar with on the industrial side, like Lockbit. Conti is another one. But then we've also seen these folks just sort of sprout a new head and continue to drive on, maybe under a different name. When we look at all of these evolutions that are constantly taking place with the bad guys, they're becoming smarter, more complex. They're using AI. Their organizations are bigger. They're working together more. We've talked about initial access brokers before here on the program.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is there one thing right now that maybe is more alarming to you or really sticks out to you and lights up your radar a little bit in terms of how these groups are evolving, becoming smarter and more difficult to weed out?
Yeah, so I mean, they really are really hard to weed out. I mean, I will give credit to law enforcement over the past 12 to 18 months. They've had a lot of very successful operations and takedowns that did create quite a dent in some of those criminal groups. However, I mean, yes, you get some arrests out of them, you get a disruption of maybe leadership or whatever, but the vast majority of individuals who are involved in either coding or the proliferation or whatever, I mean, we do know this from, and we've known this for years. They just go and do it for another. Yeah. Either there's another one that starts up, another group that starts up to kind of take over the reins, or they just go kind of freelance for somebody, for a different organization. So it is kind of like playing whack-a-mole a little bit, but that's not to say that they do create a dip for sure in in activity after these events, and it does take time for the activity to ramp back up again, usually under a different name, maybe with different loaders, different cryptors, different ransomware strains. So it's certainly a challenge. We certainly see some of the, we've been able to track certain individual or aliases, who move from group to group after a takedown, right? Because they're not taking down, they're not arresting hundreds of people. They're arresting, a handful if they're lucky. And it's not, it's having an effect, but it's not, it's not the end all be all to that, by any stretch of the imagination. So, one of the things that, we do see those is after things like that happen, we do see a lot of these individuals, they will change up kind of how they operate. We are seeing, so one of the things that we've seen historically quite a bit are these kind of mass spam, or these groups who rely on like these mass spam campaigns to deliver these backdoors that will end up greeting you with things like Lockbit or back when it was TrickBot, when that was still circulating widely, Iced ID, a lot of ransomware strains would come. We're seeing those actually not the actual I guess applications, the malware itself, but the massive distribution of those have declined in favor of things like infostealers from the same individuals, right? So what that tells us is that they're saying, hey, the ransomware stuff and all that, it was really attracting a lot of attention. It was lucrative, but we're starting to see that victims are paying less ransom. They're paying less, ransom money than they did in the past, and we know. I think Chain Analysis put out a report not too long ago that says, the actual value of ransomware payments are down quite substantially, for a variety of reasons. Companies just not willing to pay anymore. There's a lot of laws and regulations now that say, hey, you can't pay certain groups any money. It's like, it's against against the rules based on, whether they're deemed like some type of, foreign entity or something like that. So the actual amount of dollars or cryptocurrency that's being transferred to these criminals lessened. So when they said, let's maybe pivot from the ransomware to infostealers, right? Because let's just harvest credentials all day, right? Super lucrative. And then it gives them the option now, because now with a set of valid credentials, have at it. Like, what kind of attack do we wanted to launch with this, right? So ransomware is still, don't get me wrong, ransomware is still very much a thing, but we're seeing it from a sheer numbers perspective. It's not like it was 1 or 2 years ago, where it was like, it was just like every week it was a new massive ransomware attack somewhere, and I think that's because there's a lot of things at play here. It's the law enforcement activity, it's the people paying less, and also it's, I think, at least, and this is important to preface, a lot of this data, all of this data comes from our view, right? What are the incidents that we respond to? We used to see tons of ransomware. We still see ransomware, but not as much. Our clients, they have established EDR solutions in place. They're doing the right things that will detect a ransomware incident really early on, when it's still at the backdoor stage where nothing's actually encrypted yet. So I think ransomware is still here. It's still going to be here because it's just the kind of thing that's always going to generate some type of revenue. But I think attackers are saying, hey, like, in some cases, it just might not be worth it. We can make, we can still have a good return just by doing something simpler, like stealing or logging in with credentials that we've harvested from somewhere else, or that we purchased from an access broker. So, it's just, this is what they do. They evolve, they adapt. They like the path of least resistance, and that's kind of just how it's going to continue to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, ransomware is a complex topic because we do see some of these ebbs and flows in terms of ransomware dropping for a quarter, maybe spiking for a quarter. We see different things in terms of the average payouts. Yep. I think in manufacturing, we're still seeing this being very prominent. The report mentioned it as one of the biggest targets for ransomware.
Yes.
One of the biggest challenges for manufacturers is more the response than anything else. Once they get hit, how do we handle getting them out of the system? Do we pay? How when do we get insurance involved? If we get insurance involved, in a lot of these different dynamics that, again, it's hard to do on the fly. You have to have a response plan in place, which continues to be a challenge. What have you seen when looking maybe at the industrial sector or manufacturers that they could do to improve their response plans, or maybe things that they're just not paying attention to in these plans that they could and should?
Yeah, it's the second one for me. It's what they're not paying attention to. So I think what I would say is that the largest challenge is actually in the preparation for what would be expected of you in a ransomware attack. So as important as the response plan is, and it's crucially important, I think the real problem is that the preparation for it and the day-to-day operations that occur during a ransomware event are not. They're either not factored into the response plan, or they've kind of sometimes been overlooked, right? So one of the things that, and we have some unique insight into this because X-Force offers these cyber range exercises across the country where, basically we'll invite a participant, a company in that wants to do the exercise, and they'll come in with their response plan that they've drafted up and they think it's great. And in some cases it might be great. And then we'll basically put them in a simulated ransomware event and have them test their response plan in real time when the pressure's on, when they're getting phone calls from actors who are playing media or playing whatever, and it allows them to test this plan. And one of the things that we've observed is that a lot of times the response plan itself is pretty well thought out. They're executing it like to the T. They're really trying to follow along kind of what they've laid out in that response plan. But what they find is that they've overlooked doing some of the things that I think that they assume the response plan if the response plan says to do XYZ, they assumed that those things XYZ were ready to go, right? So check these particular, from a security analyst perspective, check these logs 1, 2, 3, and make sure that we're not seeing this lateral movement or something like that. And they say, wait, those logs only go back, they only go back 14 days, right? Which that's not good. And that should never have been the case, right? So the response plan wasn't wrong. It's just that they weren't ready to, when they actually had to use a response plan and like in a situation, they realized that some of the things that they went to go do weren't as effective as I think they thought they would have been. Or hey, like let's ensure that the backups, we have backup plans for all these critical systems. Let's go make sure that they're ready to deploy, and we can not pay this ransom and just get back up and running in 48 hours, right? Because we have all these backups. Oh well, yeah, we have these backups, but these legacy systems, we never actually figured out how to back those up, and it was supposed to get done, but it kind of just fell through the cracks, right? Because no one really knows how to properly back these up, and we didn't have like a full visibility into our own assets, and we forgot that these ones over here, this one system that we forgot, it turns out if that's not up and running, we're in big trouble, right? So like we see that kind of as a sticking point and I think the response plan thing, I think maybe a year, 2-3 years ago, like those were like, oh my God, like everyone needs those, but no one had them. Now I think, through, I guess, security awareness and like, being preached from various, security folks in the security space, response plans are now, they're good. They're robust. They're, organizations take them seriously. And sometimes they even test them, which is nice. They should be testing them all the time, but sometimes they even test them. But there's a difference between like an internal test where, you read through it, but then it's different when it's game day and it's like, no, like this, we have to do all these things right now. That's when you start to see some of the cracks show. And it's not necessarily always in the response plan. It's in the objects that the response plan, calls out. When you go to actually do those things, can you do them successfully and effectively? And we see a lot of times there's always like a little bit, like, yeah, we should be doing this, but it's not working, right? So that's something that I think we have some unique insight into. And I think I would actually say that. So the preparation to make sure that the response plan is an actionable response plan. It's one thing to have it written down, but is it actionable and effective? I think that's something that, and this is not really only for manufacturing, but I think a lot of sectors can kind of benefit from that experience as well.
Yeah, Chris, I'm glad we've had a chance to talk through this because I think the report, as all of them do, very good at pointing out some of the deficiencies, some of the things we need to be focused on and concerned about. But then when we go in a little bit more deeply, I think we don't always appreciate all of the progress that manufacturing in particular has made in the last 5 years. I just know since the course of us doing this podcast, the conversation is becoming much deeper and much broad, much greater in terms of the areas that we can focus on. And I think that speaks to the fact that we're getting better, the fact that we're making the hackers' jobs harder, but we need to stay so resilient because hackers have realized shutting manufacturing down is a big deal. It can be very lucrative for them, and they're continuing to do it because it does pay off. And I think that just needs to reinforce manufacturers' sort of heightened sense of priority and when it comes to cybersecurity. So, Chris, this has been awesome. Again, thanks so much for the time. Want to wrap this one up the way we wrap up all of these conversations. What are some of the biggest trends you see coming down the pike? What are some things that we should be aware of? We've touched on AI, we've touched on ransomware. There's some other things that you see as really dominating the conversation going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, one of the takeaways or one of the things I'm going to be talking to clients about over the next few months after this report comes out is where it's 2025, we are way past the point of falling victim to credential issues, right? Like we know how to solve this. We have the tools to solve this. We need to do better in making sure that, these things don't happen because it's low hanging fruit. We should not be, if hackers we should make it the most difficult for them as possible, right? And with the credential issue and the infostealers and like logging in versus hacking in, we are doing the opposite of that. And that's not for lack of awareness or trying. I think it's for whatever reason, there's been poor and slow adoption. Whether it's been under organizations' radar for too long, I think that is something that, we need to tackle head on. So we'll be keeping an eye on this as we track trends throughout the year. But we'd love to see this credential situation improve by the next time this report comes out. And the second thing is, we talked a little bit about AI being used for the creation of phishing emails, which that's, I don't consider that like a cyber criminals using abusing AI, because, that's not, they're not doing anything special, right? They're using, whatever LLM of their pleasing to help their language, which everybody does, right? So I'm going to keep my eye on, I think we all are, is what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. If the last 12 months was an indication, we'll be in a whole different AI landscape next year because it's moving that fast. How is it adopted in different sectors, right? Are we just talking about companies using, chatbots to help in HR, right? Like, that's one thing. Or are we starting to rely on AI for more mission critical things that if abused could be real catastrophic? I don't know yet. I think it's still kind of up in the air as how it's going to be used, like on a per organization basis, and how attackers are going to say, okay, and now how do we leverage this? I don't think right now, and I think last year too, developing attacks on AI is it's kind of an abstract concept at this point, and it certainly would be an expensive endeavor for a threat actor, and I don't think that they're spending time and money on that right now. I think they're just doing what we talked about, right? They're crafting better phishing emails, and using actually we know they're using AI to help them create code. We've seen that happen, but none of that changes the response to anything. It's just it's still code. It's the same code that we were looking for in the past. It's just that someone didn't have to spend a night doing it. They spent 10 minutes on whatever LLM of their choice. So I'm curious to see is how this matures over the next year, 18 months, how organizations start using this from a public perspective, right? Like, what can their customers do using AI in their environment? That's when I think we might start to see some interesting, clever uses of AI for nefarious purposes. But until then, I think, we certainly haven't forgotten about it. And, we have researchers here who, their sole job is to try to break AI in certain ways, right? So we're on top of it, but we've yet to see it become like a hair on fire moment, as of today's date. So we'll see.
No, it's going to be interesting with the AI evolution, because just heading out to RSA, I mean, I couldn't tell you how many basically new freshly funded AI cyber defense type of platforms are being launched. So the good guys are trying to really get a foot in the door there as well and be more proactive. That's another
thing. Exactly right. Like, for all the AI that can fall into bad hands, AI is absolutely going to become a massive, thing in the cyber defense, world, right? Like, products are going to be coming out that are built upon some kind of AI model that are designed to, help security. So, I think, and in this case, and it might be one of the things that, companies, when big organizations will likely have the investment capability into those products that maybe attackers may not have, right? So, again, but I think as of right now, we're still kind of in a wait and see. We know it's coming. We know it's coming. We just don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but we don't want to be behind the eight ball. So, it's our job to keep up with what's going on and put the right people kind of into the research roles to figure out what we do when it's finally our part of our day-to-day operations in all business.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thanks again for the time. Really appreciate it. Great conversation, and really want to encourage folks to download the report. We'll put a link in the episode description, and we'll go from there. Thanks again, Chris. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thanks for your time today, Chris, and thank you for joining us. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Chris Caridi, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.